In the heart of Riyadh, beneath the gleaming skyscrapers and the heavy gaze of royal power, Prince Khalid paced through the grand halls of his private palace. The weight of his royal title pressed against his chest with every step, but his mind was far from the duties of a future king. His thoughts, for once, were consumed by a woman, the kind of woman he never thought he'd fall for. Her name was Amina, a woman from the slums of Lagos, Nigeria. Amina was not like the women he was expected to marry. She wasn't from a powerful family. She wasn't born into luxury. Her hands were rough, and her skin carried the marks of a life lived in hardship. But it was her eyes, deep, soulful, and full of life, that haunted his every waking moment. He had first met her in a market while visiting a charity event for the African youth. She had been selling handmade jewelry, vibrant beads that sparkled in the sun like stars. He hadn't meant to stop at her stall, but something about her presence, the way she moved with grace despite the grime of her world, drew him in. He had bought a simple necklace from her, a token of a chance encounter, or so he thought at the time. But Amina's laughter, warm and genuine, had lingered in his mind long after the event ended. She had been kind, unpretentious, and fiercely independent, a stark contrast to the women who only saw him as a stepping stone to wealth and status. Every day since that meeting, Prince Khalid had tried to shake the image of her. But the more he tried to forget, the more she consumed him. The crown he wore was heavy, and the throne he was destined for had always seemed like a life he was born into, but never truly chose. Now, with thoughts of Amina clouding his every decision, he wasn't so sure about the future that had already been mapped out for him. It was only when he received a message, delivered in secrecy, that he realized how dangerous his feelings for her had become. The text was simple, but it carried a message he feared. Amina's life is in danger. Someone knows about you too. His heart pounded in his chest as his eyes locked on the screen. The thought of losing her, or worse, her being harmed because of their love, was unbearable. The walls of his world, so carefully constructed and shielded, were now crumbling. What had once seemed like a fleeting attraction was now a full-blown, forbidden love affair. And in a kingdom built on tradition and control, there was no room for such a scandal. Prince Khalid could feel his pulse quicken as the words in the message echoed in his mind. Someone knows. It was all he needed to confirm the deep dread settling in his chest. His relationship with Amina was still in its early, innocent stages, but its potential for chaos was clear. He had seen the world around him, his world, when it came to love. It was strategic, political, and driven by family alliances. The notion of love, as others experienced it, was a concept he'd always heard of but never truly grasped. That was until Amina. He remembered that day vividly, how she had stood out among the crowd of dignitaries and high society elites, as if she were from an entirely different world. Her dress was simple but radiant. Her face, unpainted, natural, and genuine, made the other women at the event seem almost shallow in comparison. She didn't belong in the glittering world of Saudi Arabia's elite, yet there was something about her that made him feel alive in a way he hadn't felt in years. Amina had smiled when he approached her stall, her eyes lighting up like a soft glow from the sun. She wasn't intimidated by the royal heir who stood before her. In fact, she had laughed, lightheartedly, as he fumbled with his Arabic when trying to greet her. "No need to speak perfect Arabic, Your Highness," she had teased with a twinkle in her eye. "I'm fluent in the language of the heart." Her words stayed with him long after that day, lodged somewhere deep inside his mind. And yet, even now, as the very foundation of his future seemed to shake beneath his feet, Prince Khalid couldn't help but wonder, why her? As if answering his unspoken question, the prince's phone buzzed again. Another message from his most trusted advisor, Rami. "The princesses have arrived for your mother's dinner. They're waiting for you." Prince Khalid set his phone down and ran his hands through his hair. His mother, the queen, had already begun the matchmaking process for his future marriage, of course. No surprise there, but today, he felt an unfamiliar sense of suffocation. The thought of sitting through another evening with women who saw him only as a means to secure their family's wealth and power made his stomach turn. He had to get away. The walls of the palace, usually comforting, felt like a gilded cage. His thoughts of Amina, her vibrant spirit, and her resilience in the face of hardship seemed to draw him like a magnet. It wasn't just the attraction. It wasn't even the undeniable chemistry they shared during their brief exchange at the market. It was everything she represented. Amina was everything his world wasn't. She wasn't bound by titles, royalty, or expectations. She was free, free in a way he could only dream of being. And that freedom was what called to him now, louder than ever before. But the deeper he ventured into these thoughts, the more he realized there was no going back. His world and hers were miles apart, and yet he couldn't ignore the desire that gnawed at him. He wanted her, and that, above all else, scared him the most. The tension in the palace grew thick with every passing minute. Prince Khalid glanced at the clock on the wall. The royal dinner was about to begin. He couldn't bring himself to attend. Every time he thought about Amina, the idea of spending an evening with the women his family had carefully chosen for him felt like a betrayal. Not of his family, but of the very essence of what he had begun to feel for her. Without another word to his aid, Khalid dismissed himself from his chambers, throwing on a jacket and slipping out through a private entrance. The grand halls of his palace felt too confining. The freedom Amina had unknowingly stirred within him was too urgent to ignore. He stepped into the cool evening air, the streets of Riyadh stretching out before him. It wasn't the world he knew. The world of royal protocol, extravagant parties, and endless expectations. No, this was the real world, the world that Amina had come from. It was raw, unrefined, but in its authenticity, it called to him like nothing else. A few minutes later, he was in a quiet, tucked-away cafe, one that, like him, was trying to remain hidden from the prying eyes of the public. He knew it was dangerous. He could already hear the whispers in the back of his mind. What if someone recognized him? What if the news spread? But it didn't matter. Sitting at the table, he pulled out his phone and scrolled through his messages, his heart hammering with anticipation. He hesitated before typing a message. Amina, I know it's sudden, but I need to see you. He stared at the screen for what felt like an eternity before hitting send. The world seemed to stop as the message delivered, and for a long moment, he simply waited. It wasn't long before her reply came through. Is this a joke? Are you sure you want to see me? Her response stung with disbelief, and yet it was tinged with curiosity. The kind of curiosity that could lead to something more. I'm serious. I need to see you. I can't explain why, but I'll be waiting for you at the old market. Midnight. He looked at the message again, the words both thrilling and terrifying. Amina wasn't playing along with the usual game of royal formality. She wasn't interested in his title. She was skeptical, and that only made him want her more. For the first time in his life, Prince Khalid felt the need to break free from the confines of the royal role he had been born into. But the deeper he fell into this desire, the more complicated things would get. He stood, pushing his chair back from the table, heart racing. The night was young, but it was already turning into something unforgettable. The clock struck midnight, and the streets of Riyadh seemed deserted, as if the city itself had held its breath for the moment. Khalid stood in the shadow of an old building near the market, where he had agreed to meet Amina. The night air was cool, but it did little to ease the tension that gnawed at his stomach. His eyes scanned the empty street. He didn't know what he was expecting, perhaps a figure in the distance, or the sound of footsteps drawing nearer. But all he could hear was the rustling of leaves in the wind and the hum of distant city life. Then, like a dream walking into reality, he saw her. Amina emerged from the shadows, dressed simply in a flowing black dress that brushed the ground. Her hair, long and untamed, framed her face as she walked with a quiet confidence. There was no doubt she belonged here, in the heart of the market, in the quiet streets, far from the lavish ballrooms and royal dinners he had just fled. She stopped in front of him, her expression unreadable. You came, she said softly, her voice a mix of surprise and something else he couldn't quite place. I couldn't stay away, Khalid replied, his voice thick with emotion. He could feel the weight of the words before they even left his mouth. He wasn't just speaking of the evening, of their meeting. He was speaking of something deeper, something irreversible that had already taken root in his heart. Amina tilted her head, eyes searching his face as though she were reading a book she couldn't quite understand. Why? She asked, her brow furrowing in confusion. I thought, you're the prince. Why would you want to meet someone like me? The question stung more than he expected. He opened his mouth, but no words came. He wanted to explain, to tell her that her simple beauty, her unguarded nature, had captured him in a way nothing else ever had. He wanted to say that it wasn't her background, her modest clothes, or her lack of wealth that mattered. It was her, just her, but the words didn't come. Instead, he stepped closer to her, the gap between them closing with each breath he took. Because I don't want the life they've planned for me, he said, his voice hoarse. I don't want to be the prince. I just want to be with you. Amina blinked, clearly taken aback by the raw honesty in his voice. But you're the future king of Saudi Arabia, she whispered, her eyes wide in disbelief. What does that even mean? What would we be, a prince and a woman like me? It's not possible, Khalid. You know it's not. Her words were a cold splash of reality. He had known this all along, the vast difference between them, the worlds they came from. He was royalty, and she was a poor woman from the streets of Lagos. But the more he tried to suppress his feelings, the more impossible it became to deny what he felt. I don't care about the kingdom, he replied, his voice urgent now. I care about you. That's all that matters. The silence stretched between them, thick with the weight of his confession. Amina opened her mouth to respond, but before she could say anything, the sound of distant footsteps interrupted them. Khalid's heart raced, his instincts kicked in, and he grabbed her arm, pulling her closer into the shadowed alleyway. Someone's coming, he whispered urgently. Amina didn't resist, her eyes widened, and her breath quickened as she stood in the dark with him. Their faces were inches apart now, the tension palpable. There was no going back, no returning to their separate lives. This moment, this decision, would change everything. Do you trust me? Khalid asked quietly, his face just a breath away from hers. She nodded, but her expression was mixed with fear and uncertainty. She was caught in something far bigger than either of them, and in that moment, Khalid knew, no matter what happened next, they had crossed a line that neither of them could ever uncross. The world outside the alleyway seemed distant, muffled by the thick silence between Khalid and Amina. His grip on her arm softened, but he didn't release her. The footsteps grew closer, echoing against the walls of the narrow street. His mind raced as he glanced around, searching for an escape. Amina's breath quickened, and Khalid could feel her pulse, erratic against his hand. He looked down at her, seeing the conflict in her eyes. She was just as afraid as he was. Fear of what this moment might mean, and the consequences that could follow. Stay quiet, he whispered, his voice low and steady. They pressed themselves against the cool, stone wall, their bodies close, the tension between them thick enough to touch. The sound of footsteps grew louder, and Khalid's heart pounded in his chest. They had to get away, quickly. But as the figure passed by, Khalid's pulse didn't slow. The danger was far from over. He knew that whatever was happening between him and Amina could never stay a secret for long. And when it inevitably came to light, there would be hell to pay. His family would never accept this. The people of Saudi Arabia would never accept a prince falling in love with someone like her. A woman from the streets, a woman with no title or status. What are we doing, Khalid? Amina's voice was a soft whisper, barely audible over the pounding in his chest. This can't be real. We don't belong in each other's worlds. It's too dangerous. Her words struck him like a cold slap. He'd known the risks from the start, but hearing her say it aloud made it all the more real, and it made his resolve waver. I know, he admitted, his voice raw. But I don't care. I can't turn away from you. I can't walk away from what we've started. Amina stepped back slightly, breaking their connection, but her eyes stayed locked on his. What happens when the world finds out? When your family, when your people, find out about us? The truth of her words hit him like a heavy stone sinking into his gut. He had thought about it, of course. He had thought about the way the royal family would react, the way the media would twist their love story into a scandal. He'd thought about the consequences of breaking with tradition. But he couldn't let that stop him now. This is about us, Amina. I've never felt this way before. Not with any of the women my family has tried to push me toward. This is real. His voice shook with the intensity of his emotions. And I won't let anyone take it from me. Amina's gaze softened, but there was still doubt in her eyes. She had heard the stories about the price of loving someone outside of her social standing. She had seen what happened when someone tried to defy the norms, especially in a place like Saudi Arabia. I don't want to be the reason you lose everything, Khalid, she said, her voice trembling. Your throne, your family, your future. You deserve a life that's free from all this turmoil. I'm just a woman from Lagos. Her words were a dagger to his heart, but Khalid wouldn't let them take root. He refused to let fear and doubt stand in the way of something that felt so pure, so real. I don't want that life, Amina, he whispered fiercely. I want you. The sincerity in his words seemed to reach her, as she stepped back toward him. They stood there for a long moment, the distance between them shrinking with every heartbeat. Suddenly, a loud voice rang out from the other side of the alleyway. Khalid's blood ran cold. There you are. The voice echoed through the alleyway, sending a chill through Khalid's spine. His eyes snapped toward the source of the sound, two men emerging from the shadows, dressed in dark suits. They moved with a purpose, their steps calculated and confident. Khalid immediately recognized them as part of his personal security detail, but their presence in this hidden alley made his blood run cold. The realization hit him like a slap to the face. Someone knew. They had been followed. Amina instinctively took a step back, fear flashing across her face. Khalid's heart raced as the two men stopped in front of him. He could feel the weight of their gaze, their silent judgment. His world, the world he had always tried to control, was slipping from his grasp. Prince Khalid, one of the men said, his voice stiff. We've been instructed to bring you back to the palace immediately. Khalid's jaw clenched. He wasn't going back, not without Amina. Not after everything that had happened tonight. But there was no mistaking the urgency in the guard's tone. The palace wasn't just calling him back, it was summoning him. His family would have already discovered his absence. They would have already started to make their move. I'm not going anywhere, Khalid replied firmly, his voice carrying an authority that surprised even him. I'm staying here, with her. Amina glanced between him and the two guards, uncertainty clouding her eyes. Khalid? Her voice was trembling. This is too dangerous. They're going to. They can't make me do anything I don't want to do, Khalid interrupted, his eyes locking with the guards. If they want me, they'll have to come here and drag me out of this alley. The tension in the air was thick, almost suffocating. Khalid could feel the weight of the decision hanging over them both. The consequences of his actions would be far-reaching, and the royal family would never let him go unpunished for defying their orders. But as he stood there, face to face with Amina, his heart told him everything he needed to know. He couldn't walk away from her. He couldn't go back to a life of duty and control when he had finally discovered something that made him feel truly alive. You don't understand, the guard said, his voice lowering. There are forces within the royal family who won't let this go. Your father has already been informed. You've put everything at risk. Khalid didn't flinch. Let them come, he said with a defiant resolve that even surprised himself. I've made my choice. For a long moment, the two men stood there, unsure of how to proceed. The world around them seemed to stand still, holding its breath. And then, one of the men nodded, a look of resignation passing over his face. Very well, Your Highness, the second guard said, his tone cold. But know this, you've already sealed your fate. If you stay here, your future as the crown prince will be over. Your family will disown you. Amina's eyes widened, a sharp gasp escaping her lips. Khalid turned to her, his expression softening, even as the weight of the situation threatened to crush him. Then I'll face that when it comes, Khalid said, his voice steady. But right now, I choose you, Amina. And nothing is going to change that. The guards exchanged a glance before turning to leave, the tension still thick in the air. As they disappeared into the night, Khalid stood there with Amina, his heart pounding in his chest. The consequences were just beginning, but for the first time in his life, he didn't care. Amina looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and awe. Are you sure about this? She whispered. Khalid reached for her hand, holding it tightly in his. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. And with that, he knew their love story, unpredictable, dangerous, and completely forbidden, was just beginning.